My shop has been updated with my new 2026 calendar, super cute and perfect for any cat lovers. You'll also find downloadable coloring pages, bookmarks, notepads, stickers and much more. Link is in the description. Thanks for looking! I have this massive canvas. It's freaking huge. Look at it. It is almost as big as I am. And I would love to fill this with a lot of colors and cute art. The only problem though with filling a canvas this size using paint and a tiny little paintbrush, it takes a lot of time. Trust me, I know. I really wish I had something like, I don't know, giant paint markers or something. Well, it turns out that I do have giant paint markers. These were sent to me by Arrtx, which are also the sponsor of today's video, so thank you. More about the markers in just a minute, but first, let's prep the canvas. I'm a bit of a messy painter. Let's not even talk about how I dripped paint on the floor and then I stepped in it without even noticing, so I spread it all over the place. So I'm putting on an apron. Look how cute and Halloweeny this is. Very fitting for the season and the theme of this painting actually. So I'm prepping the canvas with black gesso. I think the dark color will be a nice contrast to all the other brighter colors later. So we are in the middle of October, the cozy spooky month, so of course I'm inspired to do something fall/Halloween themed. I'm actually doing sort of a tribute to two art pieces that I made all the way back in October of 2012. So they're almost exactly 13 years old. We have pumpkins, a kitty, lanterns, purple moonlit night sky, and of course giant mushrooms, all that you need for a cozy, mysterious scene. I am no freehander. I'm not gonna redraw the sketch on the canvas without any help, so I'm transferring the sketch by tracing it from my computer screen to tracing paper. Then I covered the back of the tracing paper with soft pastel using a sponge, which is a new thing that I'm trying instead of using a pastel crayon. And this method using the sponge was definitely a lot less messier than the crayon. The crayon usually makes all of these little pigment crumbs that gets all over the place. Then I simply just tape the pastel covered tracing paper to the canvas and trace the sketch using a sharp point pen so that the pastel on the backside of the paper is transferred to the canvas. And there it is, the canvas is prepped and ready. Now let's get into the actual painting or drawing or whatever it's called when using paint pens. So as I mentioned earlier, I will be using the jumbo 15mm tipped paint markers from Arrtx, and this might be the biggest paint markers that I've ever used. Look at that big boy! And before I can use them, I need to activate them real quick, which wasn't that quick since the nib is huge and it took a little while for the paint to soak through, but it wasn't too bad. So here we have them, a bunch of lovely colors including 3 fluorescent and 2 metallics. What is really great with this paint marker tip is that even if it is a big chunky chisel tip, it is still very versatile. You can make these super broad lines, which is so satisfying, but when angled in different directions, you can get mid-sized and finer lines too. I'm gonna try to use these markers only as much as I can for the painting, so having 3 different size options in one marker will be very helpful. And if you would like to check out these jumbo paint markers yourself, there is a link in the description along with a discount code for you guys to use. Once again, a big thank you to Arrtx for sponsoring today's video. So diving straight in, starting with the mushrooms, I have always thought that using paint markers on a colored or dark surface is very satisfying, and using these super wide markers on a black canvas, it is so satisfying. The broad strokes of opaque and bright paint on top of the dark surface. It was a while ago since I referred to something art related being delicious, but the Arrtx jumbo markers on black canvas, very delicious. There was a little bit of a learning curve, if you could even call it that, getting used to it curve rather. I have never worked with paint markers this size before, and they are a little more chunky than what I'm used to, so I had to figure out how to angle it to get the best coverage and stuff like that, but it isn't really rocket science, so I got a hang of it pretty quickly. Also, if you can hear some noises in the background, it is just Luke, the dog, chewing on a bone. It isn't my dog, I'm just a dog sitter for today, but I thought it was better that he's chewing on a bone rather than chasing the cat, so please bear with me. As it usually is with paint markers, no matter how opaque they are, and I have to say that these Arrtx markers are very opaque. Some colors, especially the lighter ones, might need multiple coats, especially on a dark surface like this. So I'm actually going over some of the areas, making multiple layers to build up the intensity of the paint. I just decided to not include all the layering because it is a little repetitive and not really that exciting, but I did have to make multiple coats of paint just to have that disclosed. Also, to be honest, I do kind of like seeing some of the base color showing through the paint, giving the art some texture and depth, so I don't really mind if there are some areas where the paint isn't as covering. Sometimes it is a conscious choice. Also, I would be here forever if I tried to achieve a perfect coverage, so as long as it doesn't look streaky, I'm okay with that. As you may have noticed, I'm doing what I like to call the lino print style, where I leave part of the canvas showing through between the color areas, so it's working sort of like line art, and there is probably another word for it. I just think it reminds me of lino stamp printing, so that is why I like to call it that. It also reminds me of stained glass. I basically use the negative space of the canvas to create line art. And I don't mind too much if it's looking a little messy at this point. I can go back and clean that up later. And also, whenever I'm working with paint markers, I have this thing where I like to make these fun effects, like in this case with the light around the lanterns. Everything that's inside the light circle is painted in a lighter, warmer color, so it looks like it is lit up by the lantern light. I really like the look of that. It is both very fun to make and it looks interesting. I also love the swirly shapes of the pumpkin stems where the lanterns are hanging. I'm very glad that I brought that in from the 2012 art. In the original, I made my typical, for that time, white cat in a coat, which I used to draw a lot, and I guess I still draw cats in coats, so that hasn't really changed, but for this new art, I decided to draw one of my more recent cats, Inkblob the kitty, which is the main character for my Cattober this year. It is a solid black cat, which in my Cattober art is drawn in ink, hence the name Inkblob. So this is Inkblob the kitty being out on one of their adventures. I was fiddling around with the sky a lot. I wanted it to be a colorful twilight sky going from pink to purple to dark blue, just as in the original artworks, with a light blue glow around the moon. And you can sort of blend colors with paint markers to create a gradient, but with the style that I'm going with, I made it more like separate color blocks, just as in the rest of the painting, but once I had all the colors in place compared to the rest of the art, the sky just looks very plain and empty. I should have just been patient and let it be because I will be adding more details later, but I was impatient and I decided to color over the black lines that are separating the color blocks to do this sort of gradient where I use blobs of color to soften the transition between the pink, purple and blue, which isn't too bad actually. I really like the look of it, but it doesn't really match the rest of the art style. Having a different style for the sky, it makes it look odd having the black outlines around the moon and the glow around the lanterns. It just feels a little mishmashed, so I ended up changing the sky again later, which I think turned out a little better, but I am still torn. I do think adding all the details at the end brought it up a few notches though. Once I had all the flat colors in place, I could finally start the fun part, bring it all to life by adding the details. I really like the wide squarish lines and shapes that the paint marker creates, so I decided to add that to the art, to the leaves, the pumpkins, the mushrooms, sort of like abstract shading and highlights. I'm mixing it up with some softer shapes too. This art has a lot of bigger flat color areas, so breaking up those flat areas with some different shapes and colors makes it more alive and interesting to look at. And as I mentioned, this painting already has sort of like a stained glass vibe, and the angular shapes adds to that even more. I love it. I had an absolute blast working with the Arrtx jumbo markers and I can highly recommend them. I can't believe how fast this painting was done compared to if I was using regular sized paint markers or just regular paint and a paintbrush. Last time when I made a painting this size using regular paints, I had to spread it out over 2 videos, and this time it took 2 days, so it was definitely a lot faster. The application was so smooth, and I like that you can angle the nib to achieve different line thicknesses. I could fill in the larger areas very easily and also do the finer details using the same marker. It was a little tricky to fill in the smallest details like on the pumpkin leaves and the vines, but it was definitely doable. My only critique really is the color selection. It is a bunch of great colors and I didn't really feel like I was lacking a color, but some of them were very similar, almost duplicates, and also there is no gray in this set, which I find a little odd, but other than that, I had a great experience with these markers. And yeah, I may have cheated just a little, even if my goal was to make the entire painting only using the jumbo paint markers. I did still use some of the regular Arrtx brush paint markers too. I needed to clean up the rough edges and define some of the line work that I've accidentally covered up, which called for a slightly finer tipped markers. And I also used the brush marker to add some stars to the sky and some other small details, but this giant painting is mainly made with the giant paint markers and I think it turned out great, so challenge 97% accomplished. But yeah, I think this painting is a great tribute to my 2012 art. We have the kitty, the pumpkins, the mushrooms, lanterns, moon and sky. And there were actually ravens in the originals too, which I thought about bringing into this painting, but it didn't make the cut. Perhaps next time. I'm still very pleased with how this art turned out. I love the colors and the art style, and I hope you guys like it too. Let me know what you think of it. But yeah, that is all for now. A big thank you to Arrtx for the markers, and thank you guys for watching. I will see you next time. Keep drawing my happy cats. Bye!